Welcome to the Stockman Grassfarmer Podcast, where our mission is to help create a healthy planet and people through profitable grass-based livestock production. In today's episode, we're kicking off an exciting 4-part series with the legendary farm planner Darren Doherty.
Thank you. All right. Well, as we say after that pump up, I'll put the money on the fridge, Joel. It's all right. Now, I'll just get this thing all fired up. Thank you so much for having us here. I think we've been to I don't know how many times we've been to Polyface Farm because my wife Lisa and our daughter Isabella created the wonderful award-winning Polyfaces film, which some of you might have seen. If you haven't, have a look at it. We'll talk about it a bit during this. But so we've been here many times, but we haven't been here, I think, since 2019 or 18, I think. So it's been a while. But before COVID. Yes, indeed. So, no, we're very blessed. And our first time that we've come direct from Australia, so we've got a sense of what it was like for all of the times that Joel has come directly from Polyface to Australia so many times with us. Thank you to Carolyn and the team at Stockman Grassfarmer for having us here as well. Stockman Grassfarmer, we've been subscribers for some time. I think it wasn't until Joel told us about it that we knew about it. We have our own magazines in Australia. You might be surprised, and we even have newspapers and print and stuff like that down there. But it's nothing like the Stockman Grassfarmer. Once I first read it, it was an immediate, yep, I'll subscribe to that forever. So if you haven't already, and well, you probably have because that's why you're probably here, but an amazing, I think fraternity now. It's not just a family. It's not just a magazine. It's a whole fraternity. You probably saw this on the screen before, but I need to, in our case, pay homage to the first grass farmers on the continent of Australia, the Aboriginal Australians who nurtured our continent, such that the first explorers who did soil carbon analyses in 1847, Count von Stieglitz, of all people, he did soil analyses all over the country, and using a loss on ignition method, which we still use today, similar to the Walkley-Black method. And he found that the majority of soils had over 5% carbon. Some had over 9% carbon, and that wasn't by accident, right? And great books have been written. Probably the most famous one was by Bill Gammage, The Greatest Estate on Earth. And Australia was described by early settlers, similar to how the US was in part, as a beautiful Englishman's parkland. It reminded people of home, and that wasn't by accident. You go to the same places today, and they are all treed, and that's because the nurturing of the Aboriginal people of millennia is no longer there. Lots of land has been retired from grazing and it's being converted back to trees. So, I do need to thank them for what they did on our continent, and I think the same could apply for here and a lot of other places. So the Dja Wurrung Nation are the nation that originally inhabited the area that I'm from. So Lisa and I are both Irish Australians, very proudly Irish Australians. We don't... even though Joel has met the king, he's not our king. And we'll leave that there. We're Republicans, you might say. Two. We have a number of projects at Regrarians. So Regrarians as a brand is one I came up with in 2012. Joel might remember I had a brand... We started up the brand called Regenerative. We had that for a while, and we gave that up for various reasons. And then I was trying to think of another brand, and one of them I came up with was Trans Ag, and I'm really glad I didn't use that. Especially now. So Regrarians is a neologism. It's a regenerative agrarian. Just so you know. So the Regrarians Handbook is an ongoing piece. I'm reading the book on the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary, and I think we're getting close to taking about the same amount of time to make this one. The Oxford Dictionary doesn't have pictures, so that's what takes all of the time, but it's a wonderful piece. Just our soils chapter alone is 480 pages, so I think we're going to call it the Hands Book, not the handbook in the end. We also operate the Regrarians Workplace. We have over 5,100 members from 85 countries. We call it a professional development space for regenerative agriculture. Before too long, we'll be migrating from that because our current host is no longer working for us, and there's a certain gentleman in the audience who I won't name who's speaking later, who hosts the site we might migrate to, but we're going to chat on the lawn. So if you catch a certain man with a much better beard than mine and me talking in the field, you'll know what that's about. The Polyfaces film, as I mentioned, is something we made of this place and all of the faces that make up this place. Who's seen the Polyfaces film? All right, well, there you go. There's some DVDs to be sold in your store, Joel. That's good. All right, so let's get into what we're going to talk about, the farm planning platform that we have developed. Now, I say that we stand on the shoulders of what P.A. Yeomans created, which was the Australian Keyline Plan, which is Joel, you've got the first edition of the Australian Keyline Plan, 1954, very special. In that book, the subsequent book that P.A. Yeomans wrote, which was called The Challenge of Landscape in 1958, it outlined what was called the Keyline Scale of Relative Permanence of all things agricultural, shortened to the Keyline Scale of Permanence. And it was 8 factors of permanence. It was the first time, in fact, Yeomans' work was the first time that any human had developed a broad-scale functional landscape design package or platform. And so we stand on his shoulders, and we built on his factors to create layers, because as planners, you build layers. So some of you would have done some farm planning where you would have got an aerial photo or something like that and then used clear plastic layers over the top of it, or you would have done layers using computers, using Google Earth or otherwise. So we call it layers as opposed to factors. Yeomans went up to soils, so you can see the 8 factors. We changed some of the wording. We went from land shape to geography. We went from farm dams to water. We went from farm roads to access. We went from trees to ecosystems. We went permanent buildings to buildings, and this gentleman here is pretty well responsible for that, because I think he's only his house and his mum's house, or even your mum's house looks like it could move, right? So, and this place, although I think it's all bolted together, so it could be dismantled. So permanent buildings to buildings, subdivision fencing to fencing, soils is the same, and then we added on economy and energy, because we felt that the 8 factors of the scale of permanence weren't holistic, because what farm can operate without some bearing of an economy as its base, and how can it be powered, whether it's by the sun or by all of the other methods of energy. So these are the books that Yeomans wrote, and in that little brown bag, Joel's got the majority of them. All right, now I don't know whether this is going to work, because it may not. I might have to come back to that. Yeah, we'll do that later. Is it? No, it's going to work. Okay, so we'll start at the first layer. So my way I'm going to roll today, just so you know, my ambition is to get through the layers this morning, and then later today I'm going to run through some farm plans and take questions and so on. So if you bottle those up, or if you see me through the day, feel absolutely free to pin me down, as it were. Remember, everything moves at Polyface. Right. So climate is our first layer, and this is where we're Yeomans looked at the climate of the soil. That's what he spoke of, and he spoke of the climate as being the most permanent thing that exists. Although some would disagree with that, of course. So we look at it as being the climate of the mind as being the hardest thing to change. That farmers are very well known to be socially conservative, not easily moved as far as practice changes are concerned. In fact, my friend and colleague Charlie Massey, who wrote the book The Call of the Reed Warbler, which is published in the US by Chelsea Green, he did that book's the basis of the published version of his thesis, his PhD thesis, which he did as a 60-year-old. And he found that in Australia, over 85% of people who he interviewed as being regenerative agriculturalists only became so because of some major change that occurred in their life, whether it was they or some family member getting cancer, a wildfire, economic collapse within their farm enterprise or otherwise. So it really took a major push for those people for the majority of those people to actually change practice. So I imagine that quite a few of you here, if we were to look at Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovations, you would be in the innovator or early adopter crowd, right? But what we are seeing, and I know it's really magnificent to see the work of John Kempf and the people that he's been able to grow his business with, advancing eco-agriculture, that Gabe Browns of the world and so on, that they're all able to expand their businesses because they're starting to enter into the early majority, and that's what the marketers would call the mainstream. So it's going to take that. We're going to need a lot more people to be involved because the brand of regenerative agriculture and the demand phase from customers is going to demand quite quickly that farmers transition. So the sooner people get on board with that, the better. With that, we look at some sort of guidelines as to what the climate layer looks like, and starting with what gets you out of bed in the morning. You've got that as Simon Sinek says, the power of why. You've got to have a purpose. And it's unfortunate we see so many people without purpose. And we see so many people who are working in agriculture who are alone on their landscapes without purpose. And that's a very, Joel and I were talking about or lamenting about that yesterday, as we often do when we're talking. Just how sad it is to see a lot of often lonely men out on acres, not seeing a future, not seeing that their kids want to take things on or anyone else. But, if you're out there, you've got to have a purpose. It's the most important thing that we have. And then it goes on. I'm not going to read all of this because you will have, but it's very important that I think that people are, match where they are trying to have multi-generational enterprises, that they match the personalities to job descriptions, allow people to express themselves fully, and encourage that purpose. But also, and this is one of the great things about a place like this, which you will find, and I hope that you all feel that your farm landscapes are the best landscapes in the world. I know Joel says that his farm is the best in the world, so he should. The little farm that Lisa and I had for a while, we thought it was the best place in the world. I thought where I grew up was the best place in the world. Enjoy it. It's really important. The transition to regenerative agroecology or agriculture, or however you want to call it, it can be very long. It depends on what your starting point is. So there's that first kernel of the introduction to the concept, and which might get you all fired up, and that might be here. We are very big into. So I look at purpose as being an element of self-determination. We believe in the individual. You wake up with yourself, and then hopefully you wake up with someone next to you who you love. And you wake up and think, all right, well, what's today about? And that's really important to have determined. So why do we do what we do? And then we look at the what. What resources do we have? And this is going to be a starting point, because everyone's got a different starting point. I work with quite a few high net worths, billionaires. I can't remember how many times I've worked with them. And let me tell you that all of the money in the world, because as I often say, these people have more money than God, that doesn't mean that they will have success in this. The most successful operations that I've seen have been those where people have just worked really hard and been really strategic, pragmatic, and incremental. And I even say that too. I'm working with Australia's third richest person or family at the moment, and I've said the same to them. I said it's a trap having a lot of money, because you think you can just throw money at something and it'll work. Nature doesn't really like that approach. Nature works strategically, pragmatically, and incrementally. So why not use that blueprint? So where will we focus our attention? Which elements of a design or a plan will we start first? Where do you start first? And that's often the biggest question. What's the starting point? Is it water? Is it wire? Is it a grazing plan? Is it changing my soil mineral balance? What is it? Is it starting with cover crops? Whatever it is, you need to put it all out there and start to talk to others. I think that the practice of farm planning is like a barn raising. It should never be done by your own. We always try and have it so that, and try and manage it so that people can do these things as openly as possible. And where will you begin? When will you begin your transition? And when should I establish each step of the plan? So there's all of these elements that get built over time, and this is a lifelong project for a lot of people. What we find from the thousands of people that we've worked with is that we're looking in general at about a 5-year plan just to get the initial transition and just to get you into the new groove of what's to come. And then who will do all of this? If you're by yourself, well, how much can you do by yourself? Because a lot of you will be by yourselves. So what does that look like? Are you the type of person who is open to having a lot of other people involved in your enterprise so it can grow as it needs? And then how do you feel about all of this? When you're going through these plans, what's the feelings that you have about what sort of processes are before you, and how you'll be supported into the future. So when we look at the platform, when we work with people directly, we say, all right, well, which of the layers do you need to prioritize first? And for every one of you here, if you were to go away and adopt some of this, in the coming weeks and years, you would have a starting point. And for some of you, it will be that you have to focus on yourselves, understanding yourselves better, understanding, as Alan Savory would call it, your holistic context. What does that actually look like? Or as Jordan Peterson would call it, understanding yourself. All of these different modalities out there to help you define what your purpose is and what is driving you. I know from having received over 2,000 holistic contexts that the vast majority of people say this, that what they want is they want to increase the biodiversity of their landscapes. They want to become more profitable, and they want to have better and more secure family lives. They're the 3 most popular things that we see from a relatively small sample size, but not a small one either. So most of us, and I've been blessed to have worked in over 80 countries, and it's everyone who works on the land is pretty well the same. Most people want the same thing. I've just finished working in India, in the northeast, in Meghalaya. We've been working on a project that's putting in 8.6 million trees, mostly mulberries for that matter, which my friend and colleague Harry Green would be very happy with from Propagate. There you go. There's a nice first plug for you, Harry. So lots of mulberries. But talking to all the farmers, most of whom are illiterate cash crop farmers, they all want the same thing. How can I make my family life better? how can I make my land better so that it's better to pass on to the next generation, and how can I be more profitable? And you go everywhere, Vietnam, India, Australia, here, South America, it doesn't matter where you go, it's all the same. So you might, so as you focus on one set of layers, you might, focus on your water, you don't have good access, your soils aren't going that well, your fences are a bit shot, those sorts of things. So you might focus on those as a starting point. And then in the years to come, you'll have fixed one thing and then you get onto the another. So it's not like you're going to be able to necessarily go through all of the layers of what's going on. I mean, this place, Joel, I've often said that I've had to pick up the pieces after Joel has come to Australia. Well, because he comes with so much enthusiasm in this amazing compact that we can all witness here called Polyface, and it's a 60-year overnight success, isn't it, Joel? It's I mean, I've seen the photos in the photo albums of the beat-up cars that he and Teresa drove, and all the things that they did, all of the hard yards that they went through, that we now appreciate now. And we so often see people just want to pick up the Polyface franchise of ideas and just impart that on their landscape. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that. They have their own context. They've nurtured a family life and a whole intergenerational life and a whole integrated all of these stewards, are you still calling them they're interns? They're stewards now, yeah. Integrated all of these people into this landscape, which enable it to be what it is. Some of you, and they've got, Washington, D.C., huge markets are very, very close to here. Some of you won't be that close to markets. Some of you won't have that family. Some of you, all of you will have different circumstances and a different starting point. So you may ultimately get something that resembles this place, but it'll be your own version and it'll be very different and it'll take a different amount of time. Or it might just have chickens. It might just have beef cows. It'll be what it'll be. So it's a curious place when we start to model ourselves after other people. The geography layer is in the keyline plan was the land shape layer. We called it geography because geography it puts people into the landscape, and it not only studies the landforms, which is very important, and we'll look at that a bit more this afternoon. But it also looks at the geology that makes up a landscape, how important that is to how a place is and how it's shaped, but also demography. So demography and psychography are very interesting to us, particularly if you are looking at doing any direct marketing. So if you're going to become a marketer, well, then you better get into marketing. And central to marketing is demographic analysis. So as is the psychographic analysis of those people that you're looking at. So what I mean by psychography is I first heard of this term, I think, when I read Michael Gerber's book in 1993, the E-myth, the entrepreneurial myth, which is the year we started our farm planning business, was this whole concept of studying people's psychological profile, if you like. So if you go into a community, some communities will have a cinema, some will have a library, some will have a farmer's market twice a week, some will have one once a month, some will have an art gallery, and then you'll go to an adjacent community and they have none of those things. Now that's what I use a term called piggyback marketing. If you just analyse those sorts of things, or if you've got a Dollar General in one town and then you've got a Whole Foods in another town, very similar town, well, that tells you that someone really smart who's probably got a marketing PhD has actually done the homework, and you can just study that. You don't necessarily need to do much more than that. So that's where a market has been understood, and you can piggyback on that. When it comes to mapping, there's some amazing tools. The smartphones that some people carry, I know that some don't. What's yours called, a dumb phone, George? Yeah, my recently passed father, he called his the same. Um, he didn't like having a screen any bigger than a fingernail, really. Yeah, so these days, though, with smartphones, you can do an amazing amount of mapping. We have quite a lot of clients and members of Regrarians who use their smartphones to monitor their landscapes, monitor their stock movements, all of these things. There's apps like Maya Grazing. There's here in the US, there's Pasture Map and a bunch of others which can help you with that. Pasture Map, I think they advertise with the Stockman Grassfarmer, I think I've noticed. Yeah, and others. You can even use apps like GPS Kit or Gaia GPS. We have a lot of people who are using that to monitor all of where their stock have been, and even take photos of a paddock before and after. So, if you're new to this, then information recording is quite helpful, because as you go along and you're starting the grazing planning journey, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of new information. You haven't turned what you're doing into an art form. And this is what I see with a lot of people when they start, shift into, say, grazing planning. They do all their charts and all of that. And then after a few years, they get over the charts. They just start, because I think it's just like when you learn to paint or learn to do anything. You struggle to start. I think, as Joel says, you learn how to do things badly first. And then you eventually progress until you get really good at it, and then maybe you don't need the plan anymore because you know your landscape so well it becomes artful. Here in the US, and I'll talk a bit about this this afternoon, is the mapping that's available. So I'll take you through.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stockman Grassfarmer Podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you create a healthier planet and people through profitable grass-based livestock production.